You know how sometimes life feels like it's going just fine, and then suddenly, something small turns into a huge mess. That's exactly what happened to me last week. It all started on a Thursday morning, one of those calm days where everything seems normal. I was sitting on my porch with a cup of coffee, watching our dog Max chase squirrels around the yard. The sun was shining, the air smelled fresh, and for once, I thought, this is living. But then, as I got up to head inside, I noticed something sticking out from under the door. Another envelope. At first glance, it looked harmless enough, just a plain white piece of paper slipped under the door. But when I picked it up and opened it, my mood shifted instantly. Inside was yet another letter from the HOA, or Homeowners Association. If you've ever lived in a neighborhood with an HOA, you'll know they love sending these kinds of letters. They're always polite, but somehow manage to make you feel like you're being scolded. This time, though, it wasn't about something big like painting the house the wrong color or parking in the wrong spot. No, this time it was about a trash can. Yep, a trash can. Apparently, one of our bins had been left out past collection day, which broke rule #32C. All receptacles must be stored out of sight within 24 hours. For that little mistake, we were fined $75. $75. Let me say that again, $75. For leaving a trash can out too long. Can you believe it? When I showed the letter to Sarah, my wife, she burst out laughing. They really take this perfect neighborhood thing seriously, don't they? She said, shaking her head. Even Max seemed unimpressed when I read the rule aloud. He just wagged his tail and went back to chewing his bone. I didn't think much of it at first. Sure, the fine felt ridiculous, but paying $75 seemed easier than arguing with whoever runs the HOA. So I figured we'd send in the check, move on, and try not to leave the trash cans out next time. Problem solved. Right? Wrong. Oh, so wrong. 2 days later, I woke up early to head to work. I grabbed my keys, whistled for Max, and walked outside, ready to start the day. But instead of hopping into my car, I stopped dead in my tracks. There, smack in the middle of my driveway, was a bright orange cone, and next to it, a sign that read, "No pay RKN, violation enforcement in Puro Juriesas." I blinked a few times, thinking maybe I was still half asleep and imagining things. But no, it was real. Someone had blocked my driveway. Over $75. My blood started boiling right there. Who does that? Seriously, who blocks someone's driveway because of a tiny fine? Sarah came outside a few minutes later, holding her phone and looking shocked. "Is this some kind of joke?" she asked, snapping pictures of the scene. "Who even does this?" "I don't know," I muttered, staring at the cone like it was mocking me. "But we're about to find out." I called the HOA office immediately, expecting to talk to someone reasonable. Instead, I got Richard Langley, the president of the HOA. He's one of those guys who always looks like he stepped straight out of a catalog. Polo shirt tucked in, khakis pressed, and a smile that makes you wonder if he's secretly plotting world domination. "Good morning, Chief Carter," he said cheerfully, like nothing was wrong. "How may I assist you today?" "Oh, I think you already know why I'm calling," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Care to explain why there's an orange cone in my driveway?" "Well," Richard began, sounding way too pleased with himself. "Per our policies, unresolved violations result in escalated enforcement measures. Once the fine is settled, we'll remove the obstruction." Escalated enforcement measures, I repeated, almost laughing at how ridiculous it sounded. "You blocked my driveway because of $75. "It's policy," he said firmly, like that explained everything. I took a deep breath, reminding myself not to lose my temper. "Fine. Consider it paid. Now get this thing out of my way." "I'm afraid it doesn't work quite that quickly," Richard said smoothly. "Payment processing takes time." Time. Was he serious? This whole situation was starting to feel less like a neighborhood issue and more like a power trip. And trust me, I wasn't about to let it slide. Not without a fight. By the time I hung up with Richard, my frustration had turned into something else. Determination. This wasn't just about a trash can or an orange cone anymore. It was about principle. Who did these people think they were? Treating homeowners like children who couldn't follow basic instructions. And what gave them the right to escalate things to such an extreme level over something so minor? I decided to take matters into my own hands. First, I called Sarah outside and explained what Richard had said, or rather, hadn't said. He offered no apology, no compromise, just that smug insistence on policy. Sarah crossed her arms and stared at the cone like it was personally offending her. "This is insane," she muttered. "What are they going to do next? Tow your car if you park on the street." "Don't give them ideas," I joked, though part of me wondered if that was exactly where this was headed. We snapped more pictures of the cone and the sign, making sure we had evidence in case things got worse. Then Sarah posted them online, captioning the photos with a sarcastic comment. "When your HOA thinks it's running a military operation." Within minutes, comments started pouring in. Some of our friends thought it was hilarious and tagged local news outlets for fun. Others shared their own horror stories about HOAs fining them for equally ridiculous reasons. One guy even claimed his HOA fined him for having a bird bath that was too colorful. But not everyone was amused. A few anonymous accounts accused us of exaggerating the situation or being difficult neighbors. One commenter wrote, "Maybe they're just trying to keep the neighborhood nice. Why can't people follow simple rules?" That comment stuck with me. Not because it made sense, but because it highlighted how divided opinions could be. To some, the HOA was protecting property values. To others, they were bullies hiding behind rules. As the day went on, word spread through the neighborhood. Neighbors peeked out their windows or stopped by while walking their dogs, pretending to casually ask about the cone. Mrs. Henderson from down the street brought over a plate of cookies, whispering, "Good luck, Chief. Someone needs to stand up to them." Her support meant a lot, but it also made me realize how many people were too afraid to speak up themselves. Later that afternoon, Max accidentally knocked the cone over during one of his zoomies in the yard. By the time I noticed, a white van with Ridgewood Heights enforcement written on the side had pulled up in front of our house. Two men in matching uniforms stepped out, carrying clipboards and looking very official. "Sir, we need to discuss the tampering of HOA property," one of them announced, pointing to the fallen cone. Tampering? Seriously? I blinked, trying to process what I just heard. "Excuse me?" I asked, stepping closer. "That cone shouldn't have been here in the first place. If you want to talk enforcement, maybe start with enforcing common sense." The two men exchanged uneasy glances. Clearly, they weren't used to pushback, especially not from someone like me. One of them mumbled something about filing additional reports before hurrying back to their van. As they drove away, I couldn't help but laugh. Not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. Who did these people think they were dealing with? Still, the encounter left me unsettled. This wasn't just about a fine or a cone anymore. It was about control. The HOA wanted to send a message. Play by their rules, or face consequences. But what they didn't realize was that they'd picked the wrong person to mess with. That evening, as Sarah and I sat on the porch watching the sunset, I felt a mix of anger and resolve. "You know what?" I said finally. "They may think they're untouchable, but nobody's above accountability. Not even an HOA." Sarah nodded, giving me a small smile. "Then let's hold them accountable." The next morning, I called a meeting at the police station. My team listened intently as I explained everything. The fine, the cone, the visit from the enforcement officers. They were outraged on my behalf, but more importantly, they saw an opportunity to address a bigger issue. Together, we drafted a formal inquiry into the Ridgewood Heights HOA, citing concerns about harassment, misuse of authority, and questionable practices. We also reached out to local reporters, ensuring the public would hear both sides of the story. When Richard called later that night, his tone was noticeably less cheerful. "Chief Carter, perhaps we can resolve this matter privately," he suggested. "No thanks," I replied firmly. "Let's air it out in the open. See how your precious rules hold up under scrutiny." And just like that, the battle lines were drawn. What started as a silly dispute over a trash can had become something much bigger, a fight for fairness, transparency, and respect. The next morning, I woke up with a plan. If the HOA wanted to play hardball, then fine, we'd play. But I wasn't going to let them push me around without a fight. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about standing up for everyone who felt powerless against their rules. And as the chief of police, I had resources most people didn't. So, I decided to use them. After breakfast, I headed to the police station. When my team gathered in the briefing room, I laid out everything that had happened. The $75 fine, the orange cone blocking my driveway, the visit from the enforcement officers, and Richard's smug attitude during our phone call. At first, they thought I was joking, but when I showed them the photos Sarah had taken and read parts of the HOA's letters aloud, the mood shifted. They weren't laughing anymore. "This is insane," Detective Martinez said, shaking his head. "Who blocks someone's driveway over $75? It's like something out of a bad movie." "Exactly," I agreed. "And here's the thing. It's not just about me. People are scared to speak up because they don't want to deal with the backlash. But if we don't challenge this kind of behavior, it'll only get worse." My team nodded in agreement. We spent the next hour drafting a formal inquiry into the Ridgewood Heights Homeowners Association. We cited concerns about harassment, misuse of authority, and questionable financial practices. The goal wasn't to shut them down completely, but to shine a light on their actions and hold them accountable. If they were operating within the law, they shouldn't have anything to worry about. But deep down, I suspected there was more to the story. While my team worked on the paperwork, I reached out to a few local reporters. One of them, Lisa Chen from the city newspaper, had covered neighborhood disputes before and agreed to meet me at the station. Over coffee, I explained the situation, showing her all the evidence we'd collected. She listened intently, occasionally jotting notes in her notebook. "This could be a big story," she said finally. "People love hearing about HOAs gone rogue. Plus, having a police chief involved adds a whole new layer." I nodded. "That's the idea. I'm not doing this for attention. I just want fairness. If the HOA has nothing to hide, they should welcome the scrutiny." Lisa promised to write an article and publish it by the weekend. As she left, I felt a mix of relief and nerves. Things were escalating quickly, and there was no turning back now. When I got home, Sarah greeted me at the door, holding her phone. "You're trending," she said, half smiling. "Your post about the cone blew up. Everyone's talking about it." Sure enough, social media was buzzing. Memes featuring orange cones and trash cans flooded timelines, along with hashtags like #HOADrama and #Conagate. Some comments supported us, calling the HOA's actions ridiculous. Others accused us of blowing things out of proportion. A few anonymous accounts even tried to paint me as some kind of tyrant trying to defy community standards. But what surprised me most were the private messages. Dozens of neighbors reached out, sharing their own stories of run-ins with the HOA. One woman said she'd been fined for planting flowers that weren't on the approved list. Another man claimed he received a violation notice because his mailbox was too colorful. Each message reinforced why I couldn't back down. This wasn't just my fight anymore. By Friday afternoon, word of the controversy had spread throughout the neighborhood. Neighbors whispered behind hedges or peeked out windows whenever I walked Max. Some offered sympathetic nods, while others avoided eye contact altogether, clearly unsure whether to side with me or stay neutral. Even Mrs. Henderson stopped by again, this time with another plate of cookies. "Keep fighting," she whispered, glancing around nervously. We're rooting for you." That evening, Richard called again. His tone was different this time, less confident, more cautious. "Chief Carter," he began, "perhaps we can resolve this privately. There's no need to involve the press or other parties." "No thanks," I replied firmly. "This isn't about settling behind closed doors. It's about transparency. If your policies are fair, you shouldn't have anything to worry about." There was a long pause before Richard spoke again. "Very well," he said stiffly, "but be prepared for the consequences." "Bring it on," I shot back, hanging up before he could say anything else. As I sat down on the couch, Sarah looked at me with a mix of pride and concern. "You really think this will work?" she asked. "I hope so," I admitted. "Either way, it's worth it. Nobody should live in fear of their HOA or anyone else." For the first time since the ordeal began, I felt a sense of purpose. Sure, it was stressful, and yes, I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. But sometimes standing up for what's right means taking risks. And if that meant challenging the HOA, then so be it. By Saturday morning, the entire town was buzzing about what had come to be known as Conagate. The story was everywhere. Local news websites, social media feeds, even radio talk shows. Lisa Chen's article titled *HOA versus Police Chief, a Suburban Showdown* had gone viral overnight. It included photos of the infamous orange cone, screenshots of the HOA's letters, and quotes from neighbors who were either cheering me on or calling me a troublemaker. Some headlines were playful, like *trash can wars. When homeowners fight back*, while others took a more serious tone, questioning whether HOAs had too much power. Neighbors began approaching me cautiously, unsure how to act. Mrs. Henderson waved every time she saw me, her cookies now becoming a daily tradition. "You're doing the right thing," she whispered one morning, glancing over her shoulder as if someone might overhear. Even Sarah noticed a shift in how people treated us. At the grocery store, acquaintances either avoided eye contact or stopped to share their support. One man tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Thanks for standing up to them. We've all been waiting for someone to do it." But not everyone was on board. A few neighbors grumbled that I was causing unnecessary drama. One guy muttered something about stirring the pot as he walked past our house. Anonymous comments online accused me of using my position as chief of police to bully the HOA. "If you don't like the rules, move somewhere else," one person wrote. Another suggested I was making a mountain out of a molehill. Despite the criticism, I couldn't ignore the growing number of people coming forward with their own stories. They told me about fines for minor infractions, like hanging holiday decorations too early or having a garden gnome that didn't match the approved color palette. Others shared tales of intimidation, including threats of lions or surveillance cameras installed without consent. What struck me most was how many of these incidents went unreported because residents feared retaliation. For years, they'd quietly paid fines or followed absurd rules just to avoid conflict. Now, seeing someone push back gave them hope and courage. Monday night rolled around, bringing with it a special emergency meeting of the HOA board. The community center overflowed with attendees, eager to witness the showdown between Richard Langley and me. Cameras flashed as reporters jockeyed for good spots, and neighbors packed into folding chairs, whispering among themselves. The room felt charged, like the calm before a storm. Sarah sat beside me, gripping my hand tightly. "You've got this," she whispered, though her nervous smile betrayed her anxiety. Richard opened the meeting with his usual polished demeanor, attempting to frame the dispute as a simple misunderstanding. He spoke in smooth, rehearsed tones, thanking everyone for attending and emphasizing the importance of maintaining high standards in Ridgewood Heights. "Our goal is to preserve property values and ensure harmony within the community," he said, flashing his trademark grin. Unfortunately, recent events have created unnecessary tension. When it was my turn to speak, I stood slowly, taking a moment to scan the room. Every eye was on me, some curious, others skeptical. I cleared my throat and began. "Mr. Langley," I said, locking eyes with him, "your so-called standards aren't about safety or aesthetics. They're about control. You bully residents into compliance, hiding behind vague rules and empty threats. And frankly, it stops now." The crowd erupted into murmurs. Richard shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but I wasn't done yet. I pulled out copies of the documents my team had gathered, emails, letters, financial records, and laid them on the table. "These show unauthorized fees, selective enforcement, and questionable practices," I continued. "We're not asking for perfection. We're asking for fairness." Gasps rippled through the audience as I explained each point, showing how the HOA had overstepped its bounds repeatedly. Neighbors nodded along, some even applauding quietly. By the time I finished, Richard looked rattled, a far cry from the confident man who'd greeted everyone at the start of the meeting. As I returned to my seat, Sarah leaned over and whispered, "That was incredible." I allowed myself a small smile, though I knew the fight wasn't over yet. This was just the beginning of holding the HOA accountable, and I was ready for whatever came next. The days following the HOA meeting felt like living in the middle of a storm. The neighborhood buzzed with energy, and it seemed like everyone had an opinion about what had happened. Some neighbors stopped me on the street to shake my hand or thank me for standing up to the board. Others avoided eye contact altogether, clearly uncomfortable with the drama unfolding around them. Even Sarah noticed how divided the community had become. "It's like we're the talk of the town," she said one evening as we sat on the porch watching Max chase fireflies, for better or worse. Meanwhile, the media coverage only intensified. Lisa Chen followed up her initial article with another piece titled "Inside the HOA. Residents Speak Out." She interviewed several neighbors who shared their own frustrations with the association, fines for minor infractions, unexplained fees, and even surveillance cameras installed without permission. One woman tearfully recounted how the HOA had threatened to place a lion on her home because she couldn't afford to repaint her shutters the exact shade of beige they demanded. Another man described being fined for having a basketball hoop in his driveway, a hoop he bought so his kids could stay active after school. Each story added fuel to the fire, turning what started as a personal dispute into something much bigger. People began organizing informal meetings at the park to discuss their concerns. At first, it was just a handful of brave residents sharing horror stories over coffee and donuts. But soon, those gatherings grew larger, drawing dozens of attendees eager to voice their grievances. I attended a few of these meetings, offering advice where I could but mostly listening. It became clear that this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about giving a voice to everyone who'd felt powerless against the HOA's iron grip. Richard Langley, however, wasn't taking the backlash lying down. He issued a public statement claiming the controversy was a misunderstanding blown out of proportion by sensationalist reporting. He insisted the HOA operated transparently and always acted in the best interest of the community. To prove his point, he promised an independent audit of the association's finances and policies. "We welcome scrutiny," he said during a brief press conference outside the community center, "because we know we have nothing to hide." But his words rang hollow. Behind closed doors, cracks were starting to show within the HOA itself. 2 board members resigned abruptly, citing personal reasons, though rumors suggested they'd grown uncomfortable with Richard's leadership style. Anonymous tips poured into local news outlets alleging mismanagement and favoritism within the organization. One former employee claimed the HOA used vague language in its rulebook specifically to intimidate homeowners into compliance. Another alleged that fines were often arbitrarily enforced, targeting certain residents while ignoring others. As pressure mounted, Richard tried to shift blame onto me. In interviews, he accused me of using my position as chief of police to bully the HOA and stir up trouble. "This isn't about fairness," he told one reporter. "It's about power." His comments sparked heated debates online, with some defending him and others calling him out for deflecting responsibility. Despite the chaos, I refused to back down. Every accusation, every attempt to discredit me only strengthened my resolve. This fight wasn't just about a trash can or an orange cone. It was about accountability. If the HOA truly believed in transparency, they wouldn't fear investigation. And if they didn't, well, the truth would come out eventually. One evening, as Sarah and I cleaned up after dinner, she paused and looked at me thoughtfully. "Do you ever worry it's too much?" she asked. "That maybe you're risking more than you bargained for?" I set down the dish towel and sighed. "Of course I do," I admitted. "But sometimes doing the right thing means taking risks. If we let them push us around now, what's next? More fines? More intimidation? No thanks. I'd rather stand my ground and see where this goes." Sarah nodded slowly, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Well, whatever happens, I'm proud of you." Her words stayed with me long after we turned off the lights and went to bed. They reminded me why I'd started this fight in the first place. Not for revenge or glory, but because someone had to say enough was enough. Whether the HOA liked it or not, change was coming, and I intended to be there when it arrived. The weeks that followed felt like a whirlwind, with events moving so quickly it was hard to keep up. The independent audit Richard had promised turned out to be more than just a PR stunt. It uncovered a laundry list of issues within the HOA. Financial records revealed unauthorized fees, questionable spending, and even discrepancies in how fines were distributed. Some homeowners had been fined repeatedly for minor infractions, while others who committed similar violations somehow slipped through the cracks without consequence. It didn't take long for people to notice the pattern. Enforcement seemed arbitrary, targeting those who couldn't or wouldn't fight back. As the audit findings trickled out, public opinion turned sharply against the HOA. Neighbors who had once defended the association began questioning its motives. One woman admitted she'd always assumed the rules existed to maintain property values, but now realized they often felt punitive rather than protective. "It's like we're living under a microscope," she said during a neighborhood meeting. "And if you step out of line, even by accident, they come after you." Richard Langley tried to downplay the audit results, insisting the issues were minor clerical errors that could be corrected. But his excuses fell flat as more details emerged. Reporters dug deeper, uncovering emails between Richard and other board members discussing ways to make examples of certain residents. One email chain specifically mentioned my name, with Richard suggesting the orange cone incident would send a message about compliance. When these emails were made public, the backlash was immediate and overwhelming. At this point, even Richard's staunchest supporters began distancing themselves. 2 more board members resigned, leaving the HOA scrambling to fill leadership roles. Anonymous tips poured in from former employees and disgruntled neighbors, each one painting a clearer picture of an organization run amok. Allegations ranged from selective enforcement to outright bullying tactics designed to intimidate residents into submission. What started as a personal dispute over a $75 fine had morphed into a full-blown exposé on power abuse in suburban communities. Despite the mounting pressure, Richard refused to step down, at least not quietly. He called another emergency meeting, likely hoping to regain control of the narrative. This time, however, the atmosphere was different. Attendees packed the community center, armed with copies of the audit report and pages of documented grievances. When Richard took the stage, his usual confident demeanor was nowhere to be found. His voice wavered as he attempted to defend the HOA's actions, blaming miscommunication and overzealous enforcement for the controversy. When it was my turn to speak, I stood calmly, letting the weight of everything settle over the room. "Mr. Langley," I began, locking eyes with him, "you can call this a misunderstanding or chalk it up to human error. But the truth is, this goes beyond one fine or one homeowner. People are tired of being treated like criminals for making honest mistakes. They're tired of feeling powerless when they try to push back. And most of all, they're tired of being told their voices don't matter." The crowd erupted in applause, some standing to cheer. Others nodded silently, tears glistening in their eyes. For many, This moment wasn't just about accountability. It was about validation. Finally, someone was saying what they'd felt for years, but hadn't dared to say aloud. By the end of the meeting, it was clear the tide had turned. Several attendees proposed sweeping reforms, including term limits for board members, transparent financial reporting, and stricter guidelines for issuing fines. A committee was formed to oversee the transition, ensuring new leadership prioritized fairness and communication over control. As Sarah and I walked home that night, hand in hand, I couldn't help but feel a sense of cautious optimism. The fight wasn't over yet. There would still be challenges ahead, but for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to believe real change was possible. Max bounded ahead of us, tail wagging furiously, seemingly oblivious to the drama that had unfolded around him. Watching him, I smiled. Sometimes, life throws curveballs you never see coming. But if you stand your ground and refuse to back down, you might just find yourself stronger and surrounded by a community ready to rise together. In the weeks that followed, Ridgewood Heights underwent a transformation. The HOA, once an untouchable force in the neighborhood, was now under intense scrutiny. Richard Langley finally resigned after mounting pressure from both residents and local authorities. His departure marked the beginning of a new chapter for the community, one defined not by fear and intimidation, but by collaboration and transparency. The newly formed Reform Committee worked tirelessly to overhaul the HOA's policies. Term limits were introduced to prevent any single individual from holding too much power for too long. Financial reports became publicly accessible, posted online for all homeowners to review. Fines were standardized, with clear guidelines on what constituted a violation and how penalties would be applied. Most importantly, a system was established for residents to appeal decisions they felt were unfair, a small yet crucial step toward giving people a voice. Neighbors who had once kept to themselves began reaching out to one another, forming bonds over shared experiences. Informal gatherings at the park evolved into regular block parties, where everyone brought food, laughter, and stories. Sarah joked that I'd accidentally become the neighborhood hero, though I insisted it wasn't about me. "We did this together," I told her. "It took all of us standing up to make a difference." Even Max seemed to notice the change. Where before he'd been chased away from flower beds or scolded for barking too loudly, now neighbors greeted him with pats on the head and sneaky treats behind Sarah's back. "You're quite the diplomat," I teased him one evening as he trotted home with a biscuit clutched proudly in his mouth. As life slowly returned to normal, or at least a version of normal, I couldn't help but reflect on everything that had happened. What started as a silly dispute over a trash can had snowballed into something far greater, a reminder that even the smallest actions can spark meaningful change. It wasn't just about fighting back against injustice, it was about showing people they weren't alone. That sometimes standing your ground isn't selfish, it's necessary. One afternoon, Mrs. Henderson stopped by with yet another plate of cookies. This time, she didn't whisper conspiratorially or glance nervously over her shoulder. Instead, she smiled warmly and said, "Thank you, Chief. You reminded us we have power when we stick together." Her words stayed with me long after she left, a testament to the strength of a united community. Of course, not everyone was thrilled about the changes. A few die-hard supporters of the old regime grumbled about losing control or complained that the reforms made the HOA too soft. But their voices grew quieter as more residents embraced the shift toward fairness and openness. Even Mr. Callahan, who used to glare at me while walking his German Shepherd, gave a curt nod one morning, a small gesture, but significant enough to make me smile. Sarah and I often talked about whether moving to Ridgewood Heights had been worth it. Sure, there had been challenges, more than we ever expected, but ultimately, we agreed it had been. Beneath its polished exterior, the neighborhood had heart. And thanks to the efforts of so many brave individuals, that heart was finally allowed to shine. Looking back, I realized this experience taught me something valuable, not just as a homeowner but as a police chief. Being in a position of authority doesn't mean wielding power over others. It means using that influence to protect those who feel powerless. Whether it's fighting crime or challenging unjust systems, sometimes leadership is simply about reminding people that nobody's above accountability, not even an HOA. And hey, if nothing else, I'll never look at an orange cone the same way again.